you're designing something that has a web address, you probably don't need the www anymore. Back in the early 90s, if any of you were alive back then, the internet was a new thing. People were learning how it worked. And a web address wasn't something that a lot of people understood. And putting www in front of a web address was kind of a shorthand for saying this is a URL that you put into an internet browser. It's a bit like on your business card, if you have to put telephone and facsimile on there, you put TEL in front of the telephone and you put FAX right in front of the facsimile number. That's how antiquated it is to put www in front of a web address. And it's been that way since the early double aughts at least. I remember I worked in an office for a little while. Back then, when I was in that office, I had so many requests to add www to things, and I kept having to explain it to people that it was redundant, and this wasn't the 90s anymore. That people understood what a URL was, that I had a sign up in my office. It was right behind me at head level. So when someone came into the office and said, we need to add www to all these URLs, I would just point behind me and say, look, we don't do that here. we don't put all this extraneous information in our designs because we want people to look at our stuff and not think that we don't know how to use computers or that we think they don't know how to use computers. And my approach to design has always been one of austerity, right? Less is more. It's the classic. If you can give the audience less to look at, they're more likely to look at the things that you think are important, the things that you want them to look at. So when you put extra stuff in your design, you're not giving them more. You're giving them more of a reason to not look at what you're showing them. So every little character that you can take off gives more importance and more weight to the characters that you keep. So in this case, we're talking about when you put a web address on something, you don't need the www. And this is an old idea, and throughout the past 20 years, I've often had people argue with me about this. Like, well, they need that to know it's a web address. What do you think they're going to believe it is? If it has .com, .net, .org, .xyz, there's all kinds of them now. When people see that, we've been in the 21st century for 20 years now. They know what it is. You don't need www. And what I would always say to them is, well, if they need the www, don't they need the HTTP as well? Why don't we put that on there? And then they would say, well, we think we don't need the HTTP because they understand. Yeah, of course they understand. They understand it without the www as well. I once had a client say, well, we're just concerned that they're going to get it confused with the email address. Come on, man, really? People know what an email address is. They know the difference. You don't need www in your URLs. Right? Here's what else you don't need. Here's a bonus thing you can take off. You don't have to list the URL multiple times. So say you're designing a business card and you're designing it at 3.5 wide, 2 inches tall. Classic traditional business card size. Business cards aren't really something people use anymore, so this whole video is kind of about old antiquated design stuff, but whatever. The point, the general concept is still valid. They would ask me to put the person's name on the business card, right? That makes sense. The person's email address, their phone number, and the website of the company. So it would look something like this. It would be name, phone number, email address, website. Now, when you give somebody an email address, it has the URL in the email address. So you're essentially listing it twice. You're putting the URL in the email address, and you're putting the URL by itself, with or without www, depending on how dumb you think your audience is. And you don't need to list the URL a second time, basically, is what I would tell them. All you need is the name, the email address, and the phone number. That's it. People are smart enough to figure out, oh, it's David at davidsstore.com. You don't then need to put davidstore.com again below that. Once is enough. It cleans up the business card. It makes it less cluttered. You can make an argument. You could put the URL on the back of the card. I don't think that's necessary either. I typically like to have the logo on the back of a business card, and then on the information side, you leave it clean and just make it text. So again, the concept here is less is more. Nothing new, but specifically with websites, you don't need the www, and you don't need to list the website twice, which is what you're doing if you put it with the email address. So that's it. Go out and do less.